The states and territories are federated administrative divisions in Australia, ruled by regional governments that constitute the second level of governance between the federal government and local governments. States are self-governing regions with their own constitutions, legislatures, departments and certain civil authorities that administer and deliver most public policies and programs. Territories administer local policies and programs much like the states, but are constitutionally and financially subordinate to the federal government. The Federation of Australia constitutionally consists of 6 federated states, which are offshore dependent territories. Every state and internal territory is self-governing with its own independent executive government, legislative branch and judicial system, while the rest only have local government status overseen by federal departments. State and territory governments have executive authority to legislate on matters concerning their citizens, with the only limitations being on sovereign subjects of national importance such as defense, foreign policy and border control. Each state and internal territory, excluding the Jervis Bay Territory, also has its own legislature. Although the federal government can override any territory legislation, the Federal High Court of Australia acts as a final court of appeal for all matters and has the authority to override any state judiciary. While all states and internal territories have their own judicial system, which is subject to appeal from the High Court, most external territories are subject to the judiciary and legislature of either a state or internal territory. Excluding the Heard Island and McDonald Islands and the Australian Antarctic Territory, the external territories are governed by the Federal Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications. Each state of Australia is a successor to historical British colonies and each has its own state territorial constitution. The Australian Capital Territory and Northern Territory for the most part operate indistinguishably from the states, even though they do not have constitutional status as states. The Jervis Bay Territory is considered an exclave of the ACT for almost all purposes. Until 2015, Norfolk Island was also a self-governing territory like the ACT, surrounded by the Pacific, Indian and at Federation in 1901. What is now the Northern Territory was within South Australia. What are now the Australian Capital Territory and the Jervis Bay Territory were within New South Wales, and Coral Sea Islands was part of Queensland. Ashmore and Cartier Islands was accepted by Australia in 1934 and was annexed to the Northern Territory prior to adoption of the Statute of Westminster in 1942. Deemed effective from 1939. It has thus become part of Australia. Each external territory is regulated by an Act of the Federal Parliament. These acts contain the majority of provisions determining the legal and political structure applying in that external territory. Under S 122 of the Australian Constitution, the Federal Parliament plenary power to make laws for all territories including all external territories. The Cocos Islands voted for integration in 1984. Together with Christmas Island, Commonwealth laws apply automatically to the territory unless expressly stated otherwise, and residents of both external territories are associated with Northern Territory for federal elections. They are, thus, constitutionally part of Australia. The Heard Island and McDonald Islands, although uninhabited, are treated as constitutionally part of Australia by the central government. The constitutional status of the Australian Antarctic Territory is unclear, with successive governments treating it either as a separate territory or an integral part of the country. As of 2018, the present government appears to take the view that it is not constitutionally part of Australia. Norfolk Island's status is controversial, with the present government taking measures to integrate the territory into Australia proper. The Norfolk Islanders have not formally consented to this change in constitutional status and assert that they are not Australian. Two internal territories established by the Australian federal government under Section 122 of the Constitution of Australia no longer exist. Two present-day oceanic countries, Papua New Guinea and Nauru, were administered by the federal government of Australia as de facto and or de jure external territories for differing periods between 1902 and 1975. Following World War II, the Papua New Guinea Act 1949 placed the territory of New Guinea in an administrative union with the territory of Papua, and the combined territory of Papua and New Guinea was created. However, both territories remained technically distinct for some administrative and legal purposes, until 1975, when the combined entity eventually was given independence as Papua.